Hey everybody, it's Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com for all things here for your Piaggio BV350. Whether you have a vintage Vespa, a new Vespa, well, the Piaggio is part of the same Vespa family, so we carry the parts for this. Today I'm going to cover all the services that are needed for this scooter. I've covered in the past the first service for the scooter that we did on Alex's 2014 BV350 several years ago. I kind of never followed up with a comprehensive service on the Beverly or BV350. One thing about this scooter, it goes pretty far between service intervals. Every 6,000 miles is an oil change. Every 12,000 miles is a belt change, replace a spark plug, do a little bit more. And then every 24,000 miles, so 40,000 kilometers, is when you really need to jump in and do a valve adjustment, check the valve clearances on the scooter. So let's jump into all the materials needed, because before you start doing the service, it's best to have all the materials needed to start the service, along with the tools as well. So with the Beverly 350 or BV350, here's the factory recommended service schedule. It's found in your owner's manual or the service manual. As you can see, the first service comes at 1,000 kilometers or 625 miles. This requires changing the engine oil, oil filter, and the gearbox oil, along with some other inspections. But thereafter, you do a service every 10,000 kilometers or 6,000 miles. And with the Beverly and BV350, on the little LCD screen as part of the dashboard is a service indicator, a little wrench that comes up when the scooter's due for service. I'm not going to cover on how to reset that little wrench. You can find other videos for that, or you can find steps for doing that in your owner's manual. I want to cover the bread and butter, doing the service itself. So let's start out with the materials needed, and I'll review the mileage that you need to use each of these products here. So do every 6,000 miles or every 10,000 kilometers. So thereafter, 20,000 kilometers, 30,000, 40,000 kilometers, so on, 12, 18, 24, you get the idea. So every 6,000 miles, you want to change the engine oil. Today we're going to use the Motul 510. The weight for the Beverly or BV350 is 15W50. It takes about 1.5 liters on a full oil change with the filter. You're also going to need a couple other products, such as the 16mm crush washer for the oil drain. Part number on this is crush washer M12. If you're looking for the oil, our part number for the Motul oil is oil 15W50M, or you can get the Egypt or any oil, which is oil 15W50A. You're going to need the O-ring for the oil filter. Two different variations of the O-ring. If you have a 2013 or early 2014 model, it will have a spin-on oil filter cover. It's like a cover that has a huge nut in the center that spins off. It was slightly flawed, that it would leak quite frequently when you do an oil filter change, so they changed it in the 2014 model year. If you have the spin-on cover, you're going to need this O-ring, part number 855706. If you got the later model with the bolt-on cover, look for B018141 is the O-ring. And I'd recommend changing the O-ring every time you do the oil filter. So the Beverly uses a cartridge style oil filter. That means it's not a spin-on style. So it's a little less convenient, supposedly more environmentally friendly because you're throwing away less and you have more of the oil drain away when you dispose of this filter. Part number for the OEM oil filter is 880887. And I'll show you the filter. It's got two different sides. There's a rubber side that goes against the engine, and then this is the pressure relief bypass, which goes outside. You definitely don't want to jam that in the wrong direction, but we'll go over that when we do the oil change itself. Also, every 6,000 miles, they also recommend replacement of the spark plug. OEM spark plug is a CR7 EKB. So if you're doing a service, the every 6,000 mile service, you'll need this group of items. Moving on to every 12,000 miles or 20,000 kilometers. You have the OEM Drive Belt, which I don't have out here. Part number on the OEM Drive Belt is 83025R. And obviously, you know that's the OEM part. It's going to be the most expensive part, but you know it works perfect with the scooter. It's been engineered for the motor, but there's good quality alternative belts available that we have. We have the Oem Drive Belt. They claim it has Kevlar in it. I think they all have Kevlar. I don't know, it's just marketing hype, but they seem to work pretty good. Part number for the Oem belt is M6115279. We always keep those in stock, a little less expensive than the OEM belt. If you're looking for something even cheaper just to get by, I can't speak for the quality of them, but they are from a reputable distributor. The aftermarket belt is the OEM part number with the -AM after it. Anytime you do the belt job, I recommend changing the roller weights. They tend to last a little longer than a belt, but you're in there, they're not gonna last 24,000 miles, I can tell you that. You need to change 8 of the roller weights. They're sold individually on our website, but the package is of 8 of them. And the part number for the original roller weight is B014273. You can also upgrade the whole variator to a Oem variator if you want the bike to be a lot quicker. Definitely is a lot quicker with the Oem variator at the expense of the engine turning at higher RPMs and much lower fuel economy. You also need these 4 guides for the variator. I'd recommend having those on hand. So part number for these guides is B014584. Gonna need 4 of those. Definitely recommend having those parts on hand when you do the variator. So in order to successfully complete the drive belt replacement, I highly recommend using the factory tools in order to hold both the variator and the driven pulley so you can properly torque the nuts. I just had a customer recently come in, tried to do his own belt job, didn't quite torque the variator nut to the right torque, and it destroyed a bunch inside the transmission, including the belt cover. It like pretty much just melted the belt cover when everything came apart in there. The part number to hold the variator, very useful tool. It's like a pin spanner as they call it, 020442Y. We do have these available on our website. It's got a pair of pins. It comes in handy for many of the other Piaggio and Vespa scooters, along with other brands of scooters I've used. This is the highest quality one that I've used of this style. Very rigid, thick metal. It's more of a dealer tool, but you can certainly fabricate something like this if you're really handy, want to save the money, but this is the proper tool for holding the variator. For the driven pulley, which is the rear pulley of the transmission, this is the special locking tool. Part number is 020917Y, and it pretty much just locks up the rear pulley so you can torque or unfasten the nut. So every 12,000 miles. One additional thing that they don't really cover in the owner's or service manual is how frequently you should change the final drive or clutch oil. The clutch on the Beverly 350 is a wet clutch. It uses nearly a ½ liter of oil to lubricate it. I'd recommend a quality 80 or 75 W90 gearbox oil. This is high quality full synthetic oil. Part number on this is oil gear 75 W90M, the modal full synthetic oil. You need a pair of crush washers. Part number for those crush washers for both the oil drain and fill is crush washer -M10. And if you want to tool fill the oil into the gearbox, TOOL-SYRINGE help you out. It's just a large syringe. You can pump the oil right in there. So every 12,000 miles, you want to do the belt and the gearbox oil. Moving on to what you need to do every 24,000 miles. You're going to need to go in there, pull nearly all the bodywork, which you can see my prior video on removing the bodywork on the Beverly, to gain access to the valve cover. You need to do the valve adjustment on these. Sometimes if these scooters are ridden really hard, I found the valves go tight before the 24,000 mile interval. So if you're having idling issues, cold, this may be the first thing you want to check. But now the scooter's at the interval, it's time to go in there and adjust or check the valves and adjust them if necessary. Want to start out with success. You want to have the gaskets for the valve cover. If you have a later model Beverly, they only have 3 bolts that hold it, so you'll need only 3 of these 830-249s. If you have a later model, you're going to need 5 of them, so here's the 5-pack of them. Also, the valve cover gasket itself, rubber gasket, is part number 880662. So you want to have those 2 things on hand. The other thing you're going to need is some shims, but those are to be determined once you pull the valve cover off and check the valves. Check out the description of this video. I have all these part numbers all listed out, so you don't need to jot them down. I know that was kind of long, but just kind of went over all the stuff you need. Very, very important that you have everything. You don't want to jump in and just take the scooter apart and decide you're going to do a service. Got to be prepared for it. Let's jump on to doing the service. All right, so I'm going to do this video a little differently. I'm not going to show the easiest stuff first. I'm going to show the hardest stuff. So the stuff we're going to do at 24,000 or 40,000 kilometers. So that starts with the valve adjustment. So obviously all the body work's off the scooter. I'm going to prep the scooter for doing the valve adjustment. First of all, remove the spark plug. Regular 5/8 spark plug socket. I'm not going to go over the tools. I'll just kind of go over them as I do the service. To do a major service on the scooter, you definitely want to have a pretty comprehensive mechanics toolkit. Nothing really that special other than those 2 specialty tools for doing the belt. Go ahead and remove the spark plug, see how that looks. Obviously it's going to get changed, so we'll just probably discard this plug here. You see I got a pretty sophisticated wrench here. It's got like a ball adjustment. You can use the stock wrench, but you can see how that rotates. Makes the job a little easier. Spark plug doesn't look that bad, but it's out, needs to be out, so we can easily turn the motor over. Next, we'll remove the belt cover, the outer cover. Depending on the order that you did the service, at 12,000 miles, you'd be in there doing the belt anyways. So, go ahead and remove the 2 screws that hold the plastic cover towards the front. There's a single Allen screw in the rear, or in the center, excuse me. Remove the little plastic cover that says Piaggio on it. And then there's a little short guy right under there. So what comes out, you see some acoustic batting. There's a little filter in here. We'll go over that in detail when we do the belt. So under here, now we'll be able to turn the engine over, set it top dead center. So take a 10mm socket on a ratchet. This older model Beverly BV350's got 5 fasteners that hold the valve cover on. And that thing was pretty loose. That's remarkable. Surprised it's not leaking. That one's pretty loose too, but whatever. Taking it all apart, and then there's one hidden one. I'm kind of pulling the hose away. You can see I just loosened all of them at first. Then we can go around. Probably just, they're all now hand tight at this point. So go ahead and remove all the fasteners, these funky step bolts. You could do this through the access hole. I don't recommend it. Just take the time to take the bike apart. You're always going to find other stuff. Be able to thoroughly inspect the scooter. Come on, it's like 24,000 miles. You really should be looking over the whole scooter at this point. And now the valve cover should just pull right off. You know, obviously want to make sure everything's fairly clean. You know, it's not ultra critical that you're dealing with a clean room. You can pull the valve cover out of the way. We'll go ahead and throw this gasket away and pop all these little rubber guys out of the way, because we're going to throw those out and start with new ones. So with the outer belt cover off, you have access to the crank, the nut that holds the variator on, but you can turn over the engine. So put a 22mm socket on a ratchet. You want to turn it counterclockwise, and you can, don't have the spark plug in there, it's very important, and we'll be able to turn the motor over. 2 ways to go about it. You can look at your valves. You should see the top set of valves go down and then come back up, and right past the point where they come up, you'll see a dot in this outer chain sprocket, and when that little dot and the line are perfectly parallel or perpendicular with the center line of the the valve cover, that's your top dead center. So at this point, both the intake and exhaust valves are at the most, I guess, open position that they can be. So now that we have the engine at top dead center, which is very important for doing a valve adjustment, we could see the two rockers or roller rockers with a pair of fingers that go over each of the pair of valves. So this is a 4-valve engine. You got a pair of intake valves, and down below is a pair of exhaust valves. I'm gonna just mention all these in metric because they're nice even numbers. The expected clearance for the intake is 0.10 millimeters, so 1/10 of a millimeter. And then for your exhaust, it's 0.15, so 1/1500ths of a millimeter for the exhaust. That's the expected clearance. And the way this clearance is adjusted is this little pad. That's a little machine pad that's underneath there. And we're gonna go ahead and measure the clearance of all 4 of these valves, and I'll show you how I'm gonna write that down. There's a 0.05 tolerance that you can go in between, because the pads come in 0.05 increments. You can only make changes in 0.05 of a millimeter, for any of these valves. So you'll never get it exactly to what the spec is, but if you can keep it, anywhere from, acceptable range would be about 0.05 to 0.15 would be acceptable range for the intake. So that's plus minus 0.05 millimeters. And that's the way you adjust these shim valves. You can't get it exactly as per, but we're gonna start by just seeing how a 1/10 millimeter fielder gauge fits in there. So I have a set of fielder gauge shims right here. They're in inches, so 4/1000ths of an inch is pretty much exactly the same as 1/10 of a millimeter. So see how these fit in there. And my guess is they're all gonna be tight, because usually I've checked these, they're just always tight. And that's why you have idle problems. That feels perfectly fine in there. I feel a tiny bit of drag. Tiny bit of drag, so that's probably right. We'll check it with a 0.006. Now I'm getting weird in the measurements, but 0.15 millimeter. If these don't fit in there, then we're good. We don't need to mess with these ones. So, and it's typically, we're fine on the, you know what? That fits in there. I probably could go, 0.05 of a millimeter smaller. Definitely am not getting it. This one's really, really tight. But typically, if that's fitting in there, I think we're good. But we could go a little tighter, 0.05 of a millimeter larger shims than what's in there. So let's move on to the exhaust. This is what I'll write on the intake. This is my little cheat sheet here. The way you want to write it is the right side of the scooter if you're sitting on it, and the left side of the scooter. So I'll just write the ones that have a good amount of drag are 1.5, so 0.15, that's millimeters, so on the intake. My guess is the exhausts are gonna be tight. And of course, the exhaust is a little more difficult. It's down below. This is exactly why you want to take all the bodywork off. Like I said, it is possible. 15 is not even fitting in that left one there. 1500, let's see. Ooh, fits good in this one, I think. I think we're good here. But since we're not getting this in here, we're gonna need to make adjustment. So let's try a 1/10 millimeter one. See if that fits in there. Nope, doesn't fit in there. And last, we'll try a 0.05. If it had zero clearance, sometimes you just gotta, I'm pretty certain we're gonna have to go at minimum. We're probably gonna have to go with a shim that's 0.15 millimeters smaller. So I'm just gonna, for reference, I'll just call that a zero clearance valve. And a zero clearance valve, usually there's no free play at all. This one, I think we're pretty good. We don't need to mess with it, 0.15. So if I wanted to, I can get these right to 1/10 valves, or 10 hundredths clearance, by finding a shim that is 5 hundredths thicker. I can measure those two, maybe I will, and then I'll get them right to the right thing. But don't forget, a loose valve is always a happy valve, so that's more important. This is the valve that's not very happy right now. That's the one we definitely need to take care of. This one is okay, that one's not good. So show you how to adjust that one, or any of them here. So you're wondering how to pull the shims out. This little plastic guy right here, it pries out. Yeah, I have a little flat bladed screwdriver, and you just carefully pry this out. It is kind of fragile. You can easily crack it if you really get it out of whack. So this guy pulls right out on the rocker pins. Set that aside, and here's the magical moment right here. You could slide the rockers away, so slide the intake and then slide the exhaust, and now you have access to the adjustment pads. And the best way to get these out is with a little magnet. Of course, I'm not going to do it the best way. I'm going to try to pull it out with my nails, but let's see if I can get it out. So here's the guy that we need to find something that's at minimum 0.15 millimeters smaller. So here I have the valve that has zero clearance. Two ways to check it. You could check it with a micrometer if you have one. This is going to be a little bit more accurate, but a caliper is perfectly adequate. If you have a digital caliper, you want to close it all the way up, zero it out, and then just put the shim right in there and just put a little pressure. And it looks like we're measuring 2.97, which is likely probably a 3.00 shim, as they come in increments of 500. So let's just, on here, we'll write that it's a 300 shim, pretty much that. And we want to subtract 0.15, which is our target clearance, from that number. So that would end up with, what we want to get is a 2.85 shim. And that should give us our target of 0.15. Not going to mess with this shim, but we're going to look for a 2.85 shim. This shim's kind of useless, our 3.30. But just to get these exactly within 1/10 millimeter, we'll go ahead and also size up a pair of shims for the intakes. Again, a magnet works better, but I'm being lazy. Sometimes you can see the writing on the valve shims. Not going to find that on this, so go ahead and measure 2.90s. So that's a 2.90 for the left one. So go ahead and write that down. That's the shim that got pulled out, and then we'll see what this guy is. And sometimes you get lucky. You'll pull all your shims out. You'll be able to move them around. It's pretty much the same with any car or other motorcycle that has the same shim design. Nice thing about the shims, they tend to hold the clearance longer than the style that's found on most other scooters, which is a threaded adjuster. But anything that's higher end usually has shims, is what I find. Trying to get the shim out. Of course, I'm struggling with it because I'm not using a magnet as I suggested. Measure this guy. Yeah, that's, for the most part, it's probably a 2.90 as well. So you got to just round all these numbers to 5,000. So is what we could put in there to close that up. We probably put 2.95s in both those. 2.95 and a 2.95, and that should get us exactly at 1/10, and going to 2.85, we'll get that. Part numbers, you can see the whole range of part numbers. I would just recommend calling us if you want to order these shims. They're standard shims, pretty common, but I'll go ahead and grab the shims and we'll put them in, and then you want to re-verify your measurements. So for instance, in our workshop, I have several different diameters of shims, and then the shim assortments come with all the different thicknesses as well. Home mechanic, this is kind of a little overkill unless you're just doing valve adjustments all the time, especially if you work on like dirt bikes where you need to adjust those things all the time. So I got my pair of 295 shims, and we'll go ahead and pop those in. And that's what we determined should be the correct clearance for both intakes to get them right to the exact factory spec. Basically, we're tightening these up. They were a little on the loose side just by slightly. They would have been acceptable as well, like I said, within that range of 500ths of a millimeter. Then we're going to need to find a 285 for that one exhaust valve that had zero clearance. So got that in place, so we're good there. So let's go ahead and slide the rockers back into place, and we'll double check our clearances. So I have my 1/10 millimeter feeler gauge, 4/1000 inch. Let's see how this feels in there. And the idea, if it's perfect, it will just drag right in there. We'll do this side. There you go. See, that's perfect. See, it just, I don't know, you can't really feel this, but it just drags, and that's right where you want it. And this one might be a little tight. We might just go back to the other shim. Yeah, that one, see, that's a little tight. It wants to drag the whole, nah. No, it feels perfectly good. Sometimes it just has a little bit, there's very little friction. See how this feeler gauges are real thin, but I'm moving them right through, that's perfect. So both those are just right at the perfect measurement. Let's check our bad valve that had zero clearance. Get the 15. And it's hard when you have zero clearance. Sometimes you, even the judgment that you make by putting the first shim doesn't work. And guess what? We're still struggling to get the correct clearance gauge in there. Let's see how the 1/10 gauge fits in there. This would be acceptable since I have a whole assortment of shims, we can even go thinner. This fits perfect in there. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to even go one size smaller. I'm going to put the 280 in there. So go ahead and pull that one out. We'll put a 280, 2.8 millimeter shim in there in place of 285. And I can attest the scooter has been stalling a little bit just when it's cold, and that's usually the typical symptoms of a tight valve. I have so many customers that aren't familiar with wrenching on stuff, and oh, my bike stalls. I tried to turn up the idle speed on a fuel-injected bike. Start with the basic service stuff first. That's what my suggestion always is. So let's try this. Yeah, I bet you it will fit perfect in there. Perfect. Slides right in there. And we already know the other one's fine, so no need to check it. And once you verified those two, you could go ahead and snap the little plastic doohickey back in place. There you go. And you've got nice loose valves. I can just feel the clearance in there. So we're all good with the valve adjustments. Hopefully you got that. I'm sure there's plenty of other videos that explain the clearance. It's all simple addition. It's no fancy math in doing that. There's tables that will help you out with setting the valve clearance. But let's get the valve cover gasket on there and button that up and pop the spark plug in. So start by just pushing the new valve cover gasket right into the groove. Good idea to always change these. This gasket's been heat cycled so many times now that the scooter's got nearly 24,000 miles on it. Typically will stay right in place. If it's not, you can put a little grease on it. We'll go ahead and carefully set that in there, make sure it doesn't roll off. Then we'll open our package of these little donuts, or whatever you want to call them. So start by sliding those right onto each one of the bolts. You got to shift the valve cover around just ever so slightly so you can catch each one of the, it's pretty much the the head bolt nuts. That's what those threaded right into. And again, you got the newer BV, they only have three bolts, and they got rid of the 5 bolts on there. So I'm just starting them all. Don't want to, you know, over tighten any one of those initially. And the last one, right in this corner here. This one's sometimes kind of pesky. The gasket seems to want to sometimes slip out of place, and it's a little harder to tighten up. So now that I got all of them in, go ahead and just snug them all to where they seat, and we'll get the ratchet in there and tighten them all. And there's no real torque for these valve covers. There probably is one listed, but it's not how you deal with these things. Pretty much is what holds them is the compression of the rubber. So, and just go between all of them. And I'm feeling the resistance of the rubber gaskets compress. And you want to start with these 4 and kind of see how I'm going, just in a crisscross pattern. Pretty important. If you just over tighten one, you're gonna have problems with the gasket not seating right. So back to that one, it's pretty loose again because all of them are compressed. That one just seated. And that one's seated. So here's pretty much where I'm tightening it. So it's easy. All of a sudden it gets very tight. Just only a tiny bit more, and that's all you want to do. So the valve cover bolts they get all of a sudden tight. And that's when the rubber is compressed all the way, and now the bolt has bottomed out. And that's exactly where you want the valve cover bolts to be torqued to. And you got the last one. It's a little tricky. Got this nice little ratchet that's got a little bend to it. Probably come in here with an extension from the side. You know, there's a million different ways to skin the cat pretty much for something like this, but and there you have it. All tightened. Now we'll get a spark plug in there. So start with a brand new CR7 EKB. Make sure your spark plug cap's in good condition. These early ones had a tendency to arc out and have problems with the cap. So brand new spark plug, there's no gap in it. These are double electrode plugs, as long as the plug isn't dropped. Don't mess with any of that junky spark plugs like those E ones and whatever. They're just garbage. Even the Champion ones, they used to use Champion with Piaggio and Vespa stuff. For some reason, they don't work so good with single cylinder bikes. One thing you use in cheap plugs on multi-cylinders, where there's less demand for the spark plug, but these single cylinders, you know, they turn high RPMs, the ignition systems are pretty high energy, they tend to just deteriorate the plug. So the way you tighten a spark plug, you thread it in, and then you, just a small ratchet, just go pretty tight. And what it's doing is crushing that that washer that's on the spark plug, kind of typically only for one time. This spark plug cap actually is pretty new. I've replaced it because I had a problem with the scooter. So a spark plug cap, the cable, all that stuff's been replaced not too long ago. Even the spark plug wasn't that bad. I think I changed it not too long ago. But there you go. The valve cover gasket's been replaced. Valves are all now set. Good for another 24,000 miles.